Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to get started with the webinar shortly. We're going to give everyone a couple more minutes to log on.
Hello, everybody. I'm Jill Jarecki, and I'm the Chief Scientific Officer at Cure SMA, and I'd like to welcome all of you to Cure SMA's Clinical Trial Readiness webinar. I'm very pleased to have all of you, all the individuals and research teams from across the nation joining us for this webinar on our Clinical Trials Readiness program. But before we begin, I'd like to Before we begin our specific program content on the Clinical Trials Readiness Program, I'd like to say a few words about Cure SMA and introduce all of you to our organization. Next slide, please. So Cure SMA is a nonprofit organization, and we have a dual mission. We're dedicated to the treatment and cure of spinal muscular atrophy through research initiatives, as well as supporting the patient community in SMA. And we have a number of major initiatives that we fund and conduct to meet these goals. So the most traditional of them is basic and translational research, and we have funded over $80 million in research over our history, and we have requests for proposals each year to fund at least $1 million in research grants, and our RFP this year was date was in September, and we do this once per year. We also have many programs that are developed for supporting our family community. These include things like over 4,000 families obtain services annually from us. This can be anything from a newly diagnosed packet that we send out to families with information about the disease, information about clinical trials, toys and other small equipment that may help them. We also have an equipment pool. We also have our Summative Strength program, where we've had about over 30 different local one-day programs on SMA in cities across the country. We now have 36 chapters and over 1,200 families and supporters. We also have a membership database. We have over 7,000 affected members. I think it's up to 8,000 now affected members in our database. Since 2009, 10 years ago, we began to collect a small set of more medically oriented questions, things like diagnosis date, and other information like that type of SMA, and that gives us a little more insight into our patients. And we have, I believe, about 4,000 patients with data in this larger cohort of questions. And in fact, we just published a paper on our database and some of the data on our patient-reported data in 2018. But I should stress that the primary goal of our membership database is a conduit for providing services and report to our families. Several years ago, we started a new program led by Dr. Mary Schroth to support the clinical care of SMA patients and standardize the clinical care of SMA patients. This involves a clinical center network and a clinical data registry to obtain evidence-based standard of care, increase access to new therapies, and also could potentially lead to expansion of SMA clinical trial sites. We're collecting data on these patients in our clinical data registry. It has a unique feature of integrating with the center's EMR and also has a newborn screening portal associated with it to collect information on patients identified by newborn screening. One of the programs that many of you may be familiar with Cure SMA for is our annual conference. We've held this for many years. We typically have well over 2,000 people attending our conference, and then families affected by SMA attending our conference, and about between 500 and 600 researchers attending our conference each year. And this is one of our premier programs where we help to bring the community together to learn about each other and share the latest information on research, clinical care, and family support. The Clinical Trial Readiness Program, which we're talking about today, is through our industry collaboration. Our industry collaboration began in 2016. This is our fourth year of the industry collaboration, and we're planning more projects for 2020. And our industry collaboration is aimed at developing challenges facing the SMA community in drug development and to facilitate drug development from a patient focused drug development perspective. And we are in our industry collaborative with 7 different industry partners, all engaged in drug development, and we shape projects that we want to do together, as we said, that we believe are mutually beneficial to all of us in the collaborative. So in our industry collaborative, we have different topic groups, and one of them is the clinical trials topic group. And this clinical trials readiness program runs through our clinical trials topic group. We also have several other topic groups, including an education and awareness topic group, a regulatory topic group where we put on a patient-focused drug development meeting in 2017, the patient-reported data project topic group, and then a registry discussion topic group. And so with that introduction to the industry collaborative, I'd like to turn it over to Rosangel Cruz of Cure SMA and Ilsa Peterson to discuss the Clinical Trial Readiness Program. Ilsa and Rosangel have been running this program for the last several years, really aimed to help establish more clinical trial sites across the U.S. and bring clinical trials to a broader number of patients. So Ilsa and Rosangel, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you so much for that introduction, Jill. This is Ilsa Peterson, and Rosangel Cruz is also here with me, and we'll be speaking shortly as we begin moderating our conversation. But before we dive into the substance of today's call, which I think is really the focus and what we're all very excited about here, putting ourselves in conversation with a few different clinical research sites, I'd like to give you just a bit of an overview as far as the Clinical Trial Readiness Program. I know some of you online are likely involved in this and are already familiar with it, but some of you may also be new to it. So our Clinical Trial Readiness Program is an initiative that we established last year, really focused on supporting US-based clinical research sites and helping them to optimize their readiness for SMA clinical trials. Through the program, we've focused on creating a series of resources, really an ecosystem of resources that support that and empower teams with knowledge and understanding of patient needs to support them in their day-to-day. We will have, towards the end of this webinar, some additional commentary on where to find everything that you see on screen here. But at a high level, our readiness program includes 2 virtual readiness evaluation programs, one of which is focused on clinical trial site readiness writ large, and a second that's focused specifically on clinical evaluators and physical therapists. We have 3 toolkits that we've created to support research teams, and these are intended to be very comprehensive resources. The first speaks to SMA and to clinical trial readiness generally. The second speaks specifically to the responsibilities of clinical research coordinators, and then the third speaks to those responsibilities of physical therapists and clinical evaluators, and also covers quite extensively outcome measures in SMA. So we're very excited to have these available. Again, we'll be talking at the end of this webinar about how to access them. The other component of the program that we launched in 2019, which will continue in 2020, are in-person workshops for clinical research coordinators and physical therapists and clinical evaluators. We are very excited to have a good turnout at our inaugural workshops in June this year, and we'll be continuing those in June of 2020. We'll have a save the date a little bit later on here. Just before we move into our panelist introductions, as far as the reach of this program to date, the numbers that you see on the screen here in terms of research hospitals, coordinators, and PTs and clinical evaluators are the people that we've directly engaged with for this program throughout the last 2 years. So between the readiness evaluations and the workshops that we've had, we've directly interacted with people from 30 research hospitals. We've worked with 64 research coordinators and worked directly with 36 clinical evaluators and physical therapists. We're very excited about this. And we are also very excited with this webinar to be reaching new people. So as we look ahead to next year and think about ways that we can expand our connections and support for the SMA clinical research community, we're just very glad to have the opportunity to connect with more people, and we're looking forward to seeing those numbers increase. So with that, what I'd like to do is turn to our panelist introductions, and I'll be inviting each team. We've got a couple of people from 3 different sites to introduce themselves. What I'd like to do is start out with our team from CHOP. And so if we can move to the next slide, John and Gunda, I will hand it off to you.
Well, hello, everybody. This is John Bransema speaking. I'm a child neurologist and the neuromuscular section head at Children's Hospital Philadelphia. Our physical therapy evaluators were busy today, unfortunately, and couldn't join, so they send their regrets. But I do have a colleague from the team here that I'll let introduce herself.
Hello, my name is Gunda Simpkins. I'm a clinical research nurse, and I've been involved with this population for the last 2 years.
So here at CHOP, we have a very long-standing history of engagement with SMA research, really built by Dr. Richard Finkel when he was here at CHOP and carried on by Dr. Gihan Tenekun. I was mentored into this as well and fortunate enough to be able to participate in this very engaging and exciting area of neuromuscular care. As you can see from the slide here, we have a large research team dedicated to SMA with redundancy in each of the positions associated with it, which is one of the positive aspects of being in such a large center with resources, but also leads to complexity in terms of coordination of schedules and expertise to ensure that we have everybody that needs to be available for a research experience for a patient. One area that we'll get into a little bit later in the call as well, I believe, is the overlap with clinical care that happens when you're doing research in SMA, and I've listed the members of our clinical team that work just within neurology with our SMA population as well, who are often called in and available for our research patients if needed, if issues arise. We have about 100 patients that we follow here at CHOP with SMA. They come mostly from our tri-state area here that we tend to see patients from, but also from across the United States and even internationally for their care. And we've been part of large natural history studies such as the PNCR network, now evolving into the International SMA Consortium, or ISMAC, and several industry-sponsored protocols for SMA. And some areas that I think are interesting to discuss related to this area are the separation or overlap between research and clinical care and how to navigate that. I think there's been a lot of work related to registries and natural history versus treated patients, trying to understand them better and trying to consolidate those resources across initiatives is an important topic recently. Some of the ethics of triage and pre-screening patients and how that can be complicated, and also how we get things from the research trial through some sort of bridge of earlier managed access into the clinic is something that we've all been going through over the last few years, which is exciting to have these new options for SMA care, but does lead to its own set of challenges. So I'm happy to speak to any of these topics if they come up later, and we're very pleased to be part of the call today.
Great, thank you so much for that introduction. And next, we go to the next slide. We have just back one. I think we want to go back to the Helen DeVos slide. Yeah, there we go, great. So the dark blue. Yeah. You can just go back. Yep, right there. Thank you. Good. So, sorry, it looks like we might be having some issues with our slides advancing.
I can just talk if you want.
There you go. That'd be great, Jenna. Take it away. And it looks like we're all set with the slides now as well.
My name is Jenna Krieger. I'm a pediatric neurologist and the section chief for pediatric neuromuscular at Helen DeVos Children's. I also apparently create trick slides, so you're welcome for that. I'm here with my my clinical research nurse coordinator, Chris Russell. So we work at Helen DeVos, which is a hospital in West Michigan. We are a slightly newer, slightly smaller program. We take care of about 35 pediatric SMA patients. And between our research trials and our treatment programs, we have about 25 kids on Spinraza, 2 on Zolgensma, and then various children in research trials. We use our larger institution research team for things like legal and budget. And then our pediatric neuromuscular research team includes 2 doctors, 1 nurse practitioner, and we have 2 SMA trained PTs. We also depend on our clinical team when necessary, which includes our dietitian, social work, orthotics, genetics, endo, palm, cardiology, and our fellow therapists. We are currently involved in 2 trials right now, which is the SPRINT trial from Avexis and the TOPAZ trial from Scholar Rock. We enrolled our first patient in February of 2019, so we are relatively new and have gone through some of the challenges of building a program from the start and trying to simultaneously build a research, a treatment, and a clinic all at once, and navigating the landscape of what patients get commercial treatment, which patients get research treatment, is something that we have a pretty strong interest in. Some of the challenges that we've noticed are also trying to pick which patients out of our cohort go for specific trials, and trying to anticipate what trials are going to be coming up and which trials would be more appropriate.
All right, great. Thank you so much. And then we have one more team to introduce before we move into our conversation. Joining us from Children's Hospital of the King's Daughters. So Crystal and Elise, I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, I'm Crystal Proud, a pediatric neuromuscular neurologist. I am in Norfolk, Virginia at the Children's Hospital of the King's Daughters. We are also a relatively newer site. I've been at this location for about 5 years now. I trained at Stanford and had my first exposure to nusinersen there and clinical research trials involving nusinersen, and took that experience with me and have built our neuromuscular division here. And I am extremely pleased to work with a phenomenal team. One member of my team is here with me today, Elise Jackson. She is our physical therapist. She works in our clinic and also does research assessments as well. So we have a dedicated neuromuscular physical therapist, a dedicated neuromuscular occupational therapist, and just recently kind of changed up some of the ways that we've been able to fund a coordination of both our research and clinical care that I'll talk more about later. So we have a dedicated research coordinator just for the neuromuscular studies that we've been a part of. In addition to this, we have a neuromuscular multidisciplinary clinic with a multitude of team members that you can see listed there. And without the combination of all of their support, we wouldn't be able to run the fantastic clinic that we have, where we care for more than 50 patients with spinal muscular atrophy. We do care for both pediatric and adult patients as well, so we do not necessarily transition or graduate our patients when they become adults. We continue to care for them. You can see the clinical research participation that we have ongoing, and that list is hopefully growing. And we're really enthusiastic about what is to come in the future with regard to the newborn screening. That should start in Virginia in late spring or early summer of 2020. And so I will be one of the individuals who receives those positive test results and then directs future care from there as well. Areas of interest for us, I echo the sentiments of my colleagues. We certainly are interested in the collaboration and the coordination between clinical care excellence and research participation as well, and trying to find a way to help reduce the burden on families who wish to participate while making sure that they continue to receive excellence in care for their children. And then we're also interested in registry participation and growing the registry so that we can learn more about our patients with these fantastic opportunities for therapy that we have now.
Thank you so much. So now as we moved into our moderated Q&A, just a few words about the purpose of this conversation. So we've invited everyone really to have the chance to talk about current experiences with clinical trials, the experience of becoming a clinical trial site, ramping up and preparing for trials, and then also how things are changing with today's changing treatment landscape. I think that there are so many tremendous changes that have occurred for the SMA community, the patient community in the last few years. And we know from all of the work that we've done with sites that this is also creating a host of new challenges as well as opportunities. And so we're really excited to have the chance today to be able to get into conversation with all six of you that just introduced yourselves and talk a little bit more about what your personal experiences have been. To moderate the conversation, I'll be offering some questions directed towards our panelists based upon the interests of our attendees. And Rosangel Cruz, who's here together with me, will also offer some questions to the team. We'll try to spend about 3 to 4 minutes on each question just to make sure that we can move through and cover the topics that are of interest to our attendees. And what I'd like to do to get started is talk a little bit about preparation and ramp up for clinical trials. And this is really geared towards some of the newer sites that we might have online, as well as prospective research sites. One of the goals of our Readiness program, as Jill mentioned at the outset, is to engage potential new sites that may wish to become involved in SMA clinical trials in the future. And so, Jenna and Chris, I'll direct this question to you. And to get started, I would love to hear a little bit more from your perspective about what it has been like for you to get ready to work on SMA clinical trials. So as a newer site, I know you've been intentional and thoughtful about how you've approached preparation and ramp up and worked really closely with Chris on this as well. So could you tell us a little bit more about that and also challenges that you might have faced as you were establishing yourselves and your teams?
Sure. So Chris, I'll go ahead and start. So we started, our first SMA research patient was enrolled in February of this year. And so we started this process, obviously, the year before. I think the most important thing that we did is that we established a pretty widespread team throughout the hospital before we even were considering enrolling anyone. In addition to our institutional research team with the lawyers and the budget and everybody that does a lot of the front end work, we also had to engage pharmacy because a lot of these medications, the newer medications, are genetic, they're biologics. And so making sure that we had storage for the investigational product, to make sure that we had hoods so we could draw up samples and process the medications. We also don't have a clinical research unit in our hospital. And so we had to figure out where patients were going to be admitted for overnight. So in some of the trials, they require really frequent vital signs and really frequent monitoring, so that required a PICU bed for nursing. In some circumstances, we can use our outpatient infusion center or outpatient sedation suite, but really involving leadership throughout all of these areas in the hospital was really integral, because once we got them to buy in and be encouraged about the research we were doing, it was a lot easier moving forward. The other thing that really helped is we have 2 dedicated PTs who've done special training. They both participated in the Cure SMA PT mentoring program. So they went to another more established site. They got to get specific training in the SMA motor scales. They also brought back a lot of tips and information from other places about how things work from the PT end, which has been really helpful, because the motor scales is one of the most important things in these trials for outcomes and measures. The other thing we did is we really had to sit down and look at space, because a lot of these trials, you require a 6-minute walk and a lot of hallway space and places where you can videotape PT exams where you're not running into HIPAA violations with other patients who are in the PT gym. So working with leadership and finding places where we could actually have these long appointments was really important.
That's great. And Chris, I know, the 2 of you work so closely together. So I'm curious, from your perspective as a research coordinator, what specific challenges have come up, how you've thought about them, and how you've overcome them.
Yeah, so this is Chris. I want to echo Jenna in the fact that we just had a lot of different services that we, in these trials, that we were using, from POEM to neuro to cardiac to PT to PICU. So I think we came up across some roadblocks, maybe just not going to the right leadership or not high enough on the leadership chain, and just kind of getting to the right people. And then once we got to those right people, like, this is what we're going to do. This is the idea, and then kind of it trickled down, and it was much easier once we had that buy-in, but that buy-in was from pretty high in the hospital. And then just coordinating all these different services. We are a fairly large health system. We do have a lot of research, but it's kind of little pockets in all these different areas. So to collaborate and say, we're going to do this and we're going to involve all these different services, just required a lot of communication right up until and through the time we're enrolling, because, we're wanting to do, see all these different services, and they all have their own schedules, and just trying to make sure that everybody's working well and playing nice. And basically the most important thing is that we're able to accommodate to the patient, which, as we all know, in this population can be a little challenging, making sure that that their schedule of events for the day actually runs smoothly. So yeah, I would just say just kind of coordinating everybody and making sure everybody was aware of what we're doing and on the same page.
Hey, Chris and Jenna, thank you for that. And congratulations on the establishment of just from zero clinical trial center in SMA, being someone who has managed and coordinated many trials in SMA for several years. I understand the complexity of the infrastructure, of the protocols, of the teams, and it's certainly no small feat. So I realize you have not 1 or 2 jobs, but like 5. So I wanted to ask as a follow-up to that, because I was at Columbia for several years when we started the original trials of nusinersen, first phase 1 trials, and we had ran into the same challenges in terms of really getting all of the different hospital units and the interdependent departments to buy into what we were doing, and why was it important to set a bed aside for a clinical research patient as opposed to take it, sometimes as it was viewed, take it away from a clinical patient. So are there specific strategies, I shall ask Jenna and Chris, that you think were most helpful in terms of getting teams from across units to be on the same page, to understand the importance of new clinical trials in SMA, to understand the importance of a separate space, an infrastructure for clinical research? Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
I think that beyond like the initial argument of this is the best thing to do for our patients, these are these amazing, amazing opportunities, and we want to provide that to the kids in our area and the kids that are close to our hospital. Kind of beyond that initial argument, also just going to the very top, like of our hospital administration and saying, there's a huge halo effect. And when you bring patients in for research, you're providing them not with just this one research trial, but you're providing them with really comprehensive care and kind of helping your administration understand that it really is in the best interest of your patient and your hospital to not have your patient having to travel across the country, and especially in medically fragile children, not having to have them travel such a long distance to have access to the same research that kids that live in maybe larger, more metropolitan areas live in.
Great. And were there like educational materials, videos, information on protocols that you guys would share with these top leaders? Yeah. Just I'm trying to get into the nitty-gritty of it so that if there's anything that you did that did help, that others can emulate that and.
Yeah, this is Chris. Sorry to butt in. So I would say the biggest thing that really helped us is upfront, even when the different sponsors were coming for site selection, we had the leadership from all those different departments. We had the manager of the ICU. We had, somebody from pharmacy. We had PT people there. And I know that's not possible with everybody, but just kind of having all those different services there at the beginning really kind of helped, I think, in the long run. Basically, we knew what we were getting into. It wasn't like, oh, by the way, we're doing this. It was kind of everybody, that all the key players were there up front, and even just spending an hour or two together up front when we were being site selected, I think paid off in the long run.
And then we did kind of start with the president of our hospital down to our ethics board, met with a lot of different groups to teach them what is SMA, what does SMA care entail, how involved are these children, just to give people a little bit more understanding of what we were trying to do and why it was so important. So just basic education on what is it look like, and what are we already doing.
That's phenomenal. Crystal, I know that in your work, you've been really diligent and intentional, I think, building on this. So please feel free to respond to what's been said as well as the question that I'm about to ask. But I know you've been really intentional and proactive about pursuing resources to support the work that you're doing and enhance your infrastructure over time. And you alluded to some of this when you were giving your introduction. But could you tell us a little bit more about some of the steps that you've taken as your work in this area has grown, and how your vision for your program has evolved and is evolving?
Certainly, I'd be happy to share. So when I arrived here, there had been some studies that had been done within the neuromuscular realm, but really no studies addressing the treatment of spinal muscular atrophy, and it was something that I was eager to get started. And so some of the initial relationships that needed to be built were already present, including a small research team, but really, just as Jenna has mentioned, it does require a multitude of different relationships within the hospital to be able to take on the therapeutic needs for this patient population. And so I started building some of those relationships really from a clinical perspective first, and so had relationships established within the infusion unit and radiology. We're fortunate that we had the creation of a neuroscience inpatient unit, and so I provided some education to our nurses there who really were eager to learn more about their ability to participate in the care of patients with SMA. And from there, it really grew. I became good friends with our director of pharmacy, who has been completely supportive of clinical trials, in addition to new clinical care opportunities, as some of these drugs have achieved FDA approval. And so those relationships were kind of informal to begin with, but then I really saw that the pipeline was obviously growing, and I wanted to make sure that we had some way of formalizing all of these relationships that had been established, and to be able to support the kind of work that I was hopeful that we could achieve as time went on. So I was able to request a meeting with our local foundation called the Children's Health Foundation. They help to fund projects that the hospital finds important and areas of potential growth. And so I put together a packet and went before the board and asked for some pretty significant funding, requesting that I have dedicated staff members. So a full-time, a 1 FTE physical therapist, occupational therapist, genetic counselor, research coordinator, several members of the team that I had informally been utilizing because of some good relationships within the hospital, but it was really in good faith, and I wanted to make sure that I would have access to them as my need for them grew. So in order to do so, I had to present to the board members the background of what SMA is, why it is important that we address these needs, and then my goals for the connection between continuing clinical care with FDA-approved medications and what we consider to be standard of care, but also moving forward into opportunities for enrollment in clinical trials while we continue that care. And it would be with the same team members who were helping to facilitate the research that we were doing. So ultimately, the board thought that this was a good idea. I'm very thankful for that. And so they have funded the creation of our Novel Therapeutics and Gene Therapy Center at CHKD within our neuromuscular division. So we're very excited for what the future holds. And now we have a dedicated team that truly can hopefully meet these needs as time goes on and as research continues. And Elise is one of those people who was working with me prior to us receiving this grant and now is working with me full time.
Great. And just Elise, to give you the chance to comment as a part of this team, is there anything that you'd like to add as you've been involved in this process? Or would you like to tell us what it's been like?
Yes, thank you. I think I have been very fortunate to be in clinic for many years with Dr. Proud, getting to know these patients and this population before we started doing research studies. So I got a good background prior to getting all this extra education on the research. Clinically, we were assessing the children as a family or as a whole, really getting to know them, and then also their family. It's not just about the patient, it's about their family, their home life, and so you really get to know their needs, and so we get to foster these relationships with the patients and their families, and I think for us that's really helped to ease a lot of the anxiety of the patients when we are doing these research assessments for these patients, because they already know me. They've known me for years, so for them it's not so scary to come in and see me on assessment days. When they do come in for those assessment days, it's really just about those functional abilities that they can do, and we really get to challenge them and see how great they're doing with these assessments that we've been trained on. Where more on the clinic days for us, it's just kind of an overall assessment of their day-to-day life, and then on the research study assessment days, it's really about their functional ability and all the gains that they've been able to get.
Hi, Elise. This is Rose Angel. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. I just want to say congratulations again to you and Dr. Proud. It really is so essential, both two things that you've alluded to and talked about in terms of many, many things. One is that patient-centered approach that we often talk about during all of our workshops and trainings and through our Readiness toolkit, and why it's so important to know the patient as a whole, the family, their journey. It's everything to coordinating these visits and to getting the best results out of these patients. So thank you for bringing that up. I wanted to, and also obviously to have a team of people who know these patients and follow them consistently, and they really come in and see you all as family as opposed to sort of a separate entity to evaluate one aspect of the patient. They just see it as going to their second home type of thing. At least that was my experience. But I digress. I wanted to ask and come back to a point that you all made at the beginning. Several of you, Dr. Proud, Dr. Krieger, and Dr. Brandsema, and that is sort of the balancing between the clinical care and the research care, and how I think that with the evolution of new treatments available and just sort of ever expanding pipeline, things just are getting more complex rather than less in terms of just that line, clinical care, research transitioning from one end to the other on either end. Can you tell us a little bit more about some of the challenges or some of the key considerations that you all think about and face as you evaluate a patient and think about, okay, do we offer treatment? Do we offer a clinical research program? Or what are some of the considerations that are in your mind as you evaluate a first-time patient? And like, how do you know what is the best option to offer? Anyone can just jump in if you all mentioned that as one of your key priorities. So I'm just going to pick on John just because I know you best, and then we can go from there.
Yeah, I think this is a huge area of multifaceted issues. So starting right from the very beginning of your research relationship with a patient, I think the process of pre-screening a patient for whether they're actually eligible for a trial when they're reaching out to your site as being interested often involves collaboration with their local providers and getting a clear sense, both from the family but also from other practitioners that are involved in their care, about where they're at in the experience of the disease and whether they really would be appropriate for the kind of research options that they're interested in. And then as you start developing a relationship with the patient and family through research, setting the boundaries of where the clinical versus the research care is really important, because a lot of our patients come from within our own patient population here at CHOP, which is more straightforward, that we know them already from clinic, but we still do have to encourage them to continue to maintain those clinical focused visits when they're coming so frequently for research focused visits, but they may not necessarily access the same resources in those visits that we have in the clinic related to their care, and ensuring that those things happen in parallel. But then if somebody's coming from that also has established relationships with other providers at other centers, it's so critical to consider how you can best economize what you're doing, that if they're having something for research that could impact their clinical care, being able to share those results as much as possible, ensure that people aren't getting duplicative kind of work done or testing done that they really don't need multiple times to have optimal care, and making sure that you're coordinating with the providers who are also engaged in their care to ensure that standard of care is being maintained and that people really are optimized the best that they can in their experience of the disease. And that's all very easy to say in theory, but in practice involves a lot of getting into the weeds of, what's going on with the family and being very transparent in those relationships and open in the communication. So those would be my initial thoughts about that.
This is Jenna Krieger. I think one thing that we found is that, and I think Chris will agree with me, he gets a lot of phone calls from parents and families looking to see if their child would be eligible or if there's spots. And so we try to establish pretty broad screening questions. Can your child walk? Is your child on other therapies? So it just pretty effectively screens out a large proportion of patients before we come to like our physical therapist and our whole group to say, do we think that they should be screened? Do we want to bring them all the way to our center? Do we think it'd be worth their time?
That's absolutely hugely helpful, and perhaps something we can share forward with other centers as a key takeaway of this discussion is, some aspects to help them assess new patients, whether it's for treatment or clinical trials, different protocols within your center, et cetera. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, so Gunda, I actually have a question for you, building on some of what's been said and some of the points that have come up as far as understanding needs and being intentional about trying to, John, as you said, economize. But I know one thing that you've been really passionate about is thinking about how to take a patient-focused approach in terms of everything that you do. And this is something that I know at least you touched on in terms of building relationships with families. But moving a little bit to this concept of patient-focused trial management, in your perspective, what do you think is most important for trial sites to think about as they're running trials and to really make sure that throughout the course of the trial, the life cycle of the trial, that management is being done in a patient-focused way?
Yeah, so I have been a research coordinator for many years, but I've worked with this population just in the last 2. And in that time, I've really learned how much respect these families deserve. They're staunch advocates for their children. They're the best multitaskers I've ever seen. And what I've learned really is that we're very much a team. It's not a prescriptive thing to set up a study visit, but rather really what works best for the family. There are families sometimes who just want to get everything done in one day and make sure they're on the road before they're concerned about times of traffic. And then there are others who realize, because of course these families know their children better than we do, that their children are fatigue easily and may rather have the visit scheduled over 2 days. So I think it's a matter of really approaching them with active listening, with working with them as much as we're able to, that if, for example, they're coming in for other services on a given day, that maybe some of that can be scheduled so that it occurs on the same day as the research visit. Those kinds of considerations.
Thank you so much for that, Gunda. That thoughtfulness, especially with these families with critically ill children, the majority of them, is absolutely essential, not only to recruitment, but certainly to retention of a trial and to really developing healthy relationships, especially in centers like Dr. Proud, where you get to have sort of a lifetime of a patient in one clinic, which is sort of the best case scenario for all. I wanted to transition a little bit and ask a more physical therapy / clinical evaluator question to you, Elise. And if you could perhaps talk a bit about your experiences preparing yourself for evaluating clinical trial patients for specific protocols as opposed to just seeing them clinically. Specifically now in the face of new evolving phenotypes, which just makes the whole thing more complex, as I mentioned before. And what are some key pointers that you may have for new PTs who are starting off their training and thinking of becoming or are going to become involved in a clinical trial protocol? What are some things that have helped you in that preparation? Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. I think, again, I'm very grateful that I have been in the clinic for a couple of years before doing research, because I really got to know this population prior to the new advances that we currently have, where before we were just addressing equipment and the needs of the family to make the patient and the family more comfortable. Where now, with all this research that's been going on and the advances, these patients are now rolling and sitting and pushing into quadruped and standing and starting to walk, and it's amazing that we get to see that they're now meeting their gross motor milestones. So for the different protocols, every study is a little different. So for myself, I always like to read over my protocol every time we have a study, because I do still feel like I'm very new to this, and every research study is slightly different. So I always go back over, do a little studying, read over everything. During the assessments, I always have my protocol binder with me so I can reference it right away. And I think now that I have been doing it just for a little bit, but even just the few studies we've had, I do feel much more comfortable. And it's just amazing now that we get to see them making advances in these assessments. And they're trying really hard, and they're so proud of themselves that they're able to do things before that they couldn't do. So I think as time goes on, I will still feel more comfortable, but it won't change that I still will always go back and read my manual, ask questions when I need to, and there is such a strong community that's out here for all these research studies, so I don't hesitate to call somebody if I need to, or email somebody just to make sure that I'm on the right page and I want to feel confident in what I'm doing to help these patients make these goals that they are trying to achieve.
Right, that's so great. And I think that's really good practical advice, which is definitely one of the things that we wanted to be able to share today. So we are coming up on the end of the hour that we had set aside. What I'd like to do is ask just one more question of each of our teams that's on the phone today with us. And then we'll transition to wrap up and a little bit of a look ahead at what we have coming for the clinical trial readiness program. But the last question that I'd like to ask, and I'll just go around the table here, so to speak, is looking back on your experience, what is the most important thing that you think that you've learned that you'd like to be able to share with others who might be working in this space? And Dr. Kruger, Jenna, if I could start with you and Chris.
I think the most important part is just building your team. We take so much and we work so interconnected. We have team meetings twice a month where we all sit in the room together and I hear the perspective from our dietitian or our social work or our physical therapist, and it has such a huge impact on how we run our trials and how we kind of sort our patients through. So I think that's been the most valuable thing that we have done.
Great. Crystal and Elise, how about you?
We were both just echoing Dr. Kruger's thoughts that certainly teamwork and relying on the team is absolutely critical. This really is a circumstance where it takes a village, and it takes a flexible village, because these children will get sick or have an off day, and we need to be able to modify our plans around their needs. And so having a team that understands them, understands their needs, and really respects that this is such a unique group where the family truly is the expert in their own child. I think if you have a team that understands all of those moving components, then you can succeed. And so collaboration and teamwork is absolutely critical.
Great, thank you. And John and Gunda, last but not least.
I think I echo everything about communication and teams, but also respecting SMA as a disease. And I think that Dr. Proud was alluding to this a bit too, that we have to remember that in this atmosphere of hope and all of these new approaches, people are still facing significant challenges to their health, and we have setbacks with respiratory exacerbations and other things in our trial patients, just like we do in the clinic. Even the practicality of scheduling a research visit, understanding that if you want to do a functional assessment, it's best to do that early on when people have the best reserve of energy, and save some of the echoes and other things that may not take as much participation but are still draining for the patient in terms of their reserve for later in the day. And practical things like how long you're asking people to wait before they have a snack or a meal or other things that they're so sensitive to a low intake. These are all very practical things that you have to remember dealing with a disease like SMA. And this is why all of these AEs do come up in our trials, is that even in the context of gain and improvement, there's still a lot going on for our patients that we need to best optimize and help them to navigate together.
Wow, thank you each so much. These are all, thank you, John. That's really, really important, and something that I think Cure SMA as an organization, and I think Dr. Schroes will give me, will smile at me for saying this, but certainly that's one thing and one messaging that we want to bring across, that in the face of all of this hope, which is warranted, that we do need to continue to look at SMA as a serious disease and continue to treat it as such, and be faithful to the protocols that have been recommended to ensure that each child is able to do the best that they can, given the fact that they do have SMA. And of course, it's slightly different with pre-symptomatic children, but most of the folks treated symptomatically, we expect a more natural history, or the courses of the disease is still unpredictable in many ways, even when treated. So thank you very much for that, and also your highlighting the importance of teamwork. It is everything to an effective trial. So thank you each so much for your time and bringing your expertise and success stories and all of the great things that you are able to do with the patient community to this discussion, and to hopefully elucidate and help carve a path for those that are starting, that have maybe less experience, or just other colleagues that will identify very much with some of the challenges that you all face day to day treating an SMA patient community. So we really appreciate your time today. And I will bring it back to Elsa to tell us a little bit more about some of the resources that we have put together with the help of many PIs such as yourselves, and input from key clinicians and caregivers to hopefully help strengthen your teams as you continue to serve these amazing patient communities. So Elsa?
All right, very good. So I'll say just a few words in our last 5 minutes here about the activities and resources that we have. So if we go to the next slide. We are very, very excited, and we'll give you a preview of the page in just a moment, to be launching as of this month a new online hub that has various resources that we've talked about today. So I'll speak about that in just a moment. Also continuing in the time ahead of us here will be our readiness evaluation programs, and I'd like to extend an invitation to anybody that is interested in becoming involved but has not yet become involved to think about contacting us. There's information on our webpage about how to do that and how to become involved. We also will have workshops next year at Cure SMA's 2020 annual conference. So we don't know the specific days yet, but we do know the dates of the conference. Those are up on the screen there, and we'd like to encourage you to save the date. And finally, one very exciting opportunity that's actually underway right now that I'll speak to is a survey that we're currently conducting with the patient and caregiver community. So if we go to the next slide, just a couple of words on our Clinical Trial Readiness Hub, which we are so excited after 2 years of work now to have these resources publicly available and available for free. The page that you can see on screen here, we've got the address at the top. This is Cure SMA's hub for information about the readiness program as a whole. We have information about the evaluation program. We have the 3 best practices toolkits that I mentioned available for download. Each of those is free. You just need to complete a short form telling us a little bit about yourself and your interests in order to access them. And then in addition to this, this is a hub that will keep up to date. Over time, we'll post information about future events. We're planning to post a recording of this webinar to this webpage. So there's a lot more to come. The other thing that I want to mention about this webpage, because Rose Angel mentioned input, and this is so important to this program being a success. You can see on the bottom of the page there's a provide feedback link. We've actually created a couple of places where sites and research teams can provide input and feedback to us on the program, the activities, the resources that we have available. We would invite you both to provide feedback on the specific toolkits. So to the extent that you're using these toolkits, we've made them available not just for download, but so that you can actually go into this forum and you can say, hey, there's a topic that I'd really like to see covered, or I think you should cover. Here's an experience that I had that I really want to be able to share with research teams. These are intended to be dynamic resources. So you can share them, you can provide that feedback. You can also suggest future activities via the Learn More and Download Toolkits form. So if we go to the next page, the last thing I'd like to mention, beyond encouraging you to stay tuned, check that webpage, please do use Access Share, our resources, is that currently we are fielding a survey. If you are a PI or a coordinator for an SMA clinical trial, you should have received an email from Cure SMA about this. But we're fielding a survey of current and past SMA clinical trial participants, so that's inclusive of patient caregivers, to understand their experiences and opportunities for patient-focused trial management. What we've done with the survey is really focused, it's not specific to any drug, it's specific to experiences as a whole and really focused on trial management. But we've addressed recruitment, enrollment, logistics, and then relationships between patients and research teams with the goal of understanding experiences, but more importantly, identifying actionable opportunities that we can pursue to optimize trial management so that it is more patient-focused. As I said at the beginning, this is research that we plan to publish. We really want to make sure that this is broadly representative of the patient community, and that it results in insights that are of value to everyone within this community, patients, caregivers, and research teams alike. So if you did not receive that email and you're interested in being able to share information, please contact us. We do have the link there on the screen and encourage you to spread the word to your patients. If you do contact us, we have a flyer that PIs and coordinators can send out to their patient community to really make the list very light for you. In fact, we have not just a flyer, but we have a draft email that can be forwarded. So with that, I think can wrap up and move on to our final slide, which is a thank you to everyone that participated in the webinar, that's been part of the conversation as a panelist today, and also to everyone that's online. We know that this program is only here because of the involvement of all of you, and we're so glad to have you engaged, and we're so glad as well with this webinar to be able to reach more people across the country. I think that this has been a really nice chance to expand our reach beyond the face-to-face interactions that we had in June, beyond the direct conversations that we have through the readiness evaluations over the phone and more direct email exchanges and so forth. And we'd like to continue to expand our footprint and reach more people. So we'd love for you to get involved if you're not already. You can do that on our webpage by completing the Learn More form. And finally, what we'd like to do is just invite you to provide feedback on this webinar. This is something that's very much related to what I've said in terms of the importance of feedback. We need to hear from you to know that what we're creating for you is of value, that it's meeting your needs, that it's responding to them. And we know that this landscape is only going to continue to evolve. And so as those changes continue to happen, we want this to be a conversation. So please, if you're willing to take just a moment to complete that post-webinar survey, please go to our webpage, download the toolkits, get involved, share them with your team members, because this is all for you. So Rosangel, do you have anything final to say?
Thank you. Thank you for all that. And yes, we're here to try to make your lives easier, better in any way possible. We want our work to be meaningful. We put a lot of thought, time, effort into it. I think you all will find it valuable depending, regardless of your experience as a trial coordinator or PI. And would love to continue to hear from you and make it even more meaningful in the years to come. So please let us know how we can help. Thank you so much for your time today. And thank you, Ilsa, for a great job.
All right. Take care, everyone. Have a good day.